Hi, welcome to Highland Cottage Books. I'm Martha, and this is Highland Cottage, and today I'm celebrating the fact that Halloween is right around the corner. Now, that's good news and bad news. Good news because, yay, Halloween's almost here, but bad news because that means we only have a few more weeks to get in some reading before the 31st. However, I have made a list of amazing short books that you can squeeze in before the big day. So I made coffee and tea and some hot cider. Grab yourself a mug, have a seat on the couch, and let's talk books. Coming in hot at a very svelte 160 pages is The Ballad of Black Tom, a brilliant reimagining of The Horror of Red Hook by H.P. Lovecraft. It's told from the perspective of a black hustler in the 1920s. Tommy Tester is just scraping by, trying to help his dad, when a rich white man invites him to come play guitar at his party. The whole situation seems a bit sketchy, but the money is too much to pass up. His first instinct is correct. He should have run before he gets pulled into a world of cosmic horror. On a surface level, the story is terrifying. However, what makes it a modern classic is the way in which LaValle uses Lovecraft's famous racism, exposes it, turns it on its head, and uses it to elevate and transcend the source material, making a kind of mediocre, if we're honest, story into a compelling parable and morality tale. In Restup, which is 176 pages, Abe is a struggling musician rushing to the hospital to go see his grandmother, who has just had a stroke. He pulls off the highway for a bathroom break and some snacks, and is surprised because the rest stop is completely lit and clearly open, but no one's there. While he's in the restroom, he debates whether or not just to take some chips and some drinks and leave some money on the counter. But as he goes to leave, he discovers that the door is locked. But then a panel opens in the ceiling and something creepy, crawly, and eight-legged drops down, and it's only the first of some very nasty trials that Abe has to face. At this point, I noped out of the story for a few months, knowing that I was going to come back. I love Nat Cassidy. He wrote When the Wolf Comes Home, which is one of my favorite books from this year, if not of all time. And I knew that he had more in store for me than just a tale of awful woe. So I'm glad that I did come back, but be warned, the story is not for the squeamish. Ultimately, it's a tale of survival and resilience as Abe discovers whether or not he has what it takes to live through the night. The 288-page Black Sheep follows the story of Vesper Wright, who has escaped from her very religious community growing up. And it's the sort of community where if you leave, they don't want you to come back. You're not allowed to return. However, one day she receives a wedding invitation from her childhood best friend who is marrying her high school boyfriend. Now, if that was just the story, that would be a full horror story unto itself. But wait, there's more. She goes and she discovers a whole lot more about her family than she ever wanted to know. I would recommend going in completely blind, to the point where I wouldn't even read the flap on the book. This book has some very surprising twists, and I feel that sometimes one of the most incredible gets ruined kind of casually, and I think you should just give it a shot. It is hilarious and upsetting, and it's also a satire, and it's wonderful and genuinely frightening as well. Does this book look vaguely familiar, a bit like a coffee table fixture of your life in the 10 years after you graduated from college or beyond? This is Horrorstör by Grady Hendrix, and it is a satire and a terrifying, terrifying novel all in one. It obviously looks like an IKEA catalog because it takes place in a store that is an IKEA knockoff. There are a group of workers who are tasked with spending the evening there trying to discover what's behind the cases of vandalism that keep happening overnight. What they find is not a simple case of human malfeasance. Rather, they discover that their big box store is actually haunted. I would highly recommend reading this book in physical form because over the course of the book, there are a series of... It does look like an IKEA catalog, and there are a series of products that you can buy, or they say you can buy, and with whimsical little descriptions. But as the book gets scarier and more frightening, the diagrams get much, 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 much more disturbing. It's a quick read and a must read for anyone who has experienced the hell of working in retail. The Hellbound Heart is the 176-page novella that Hellraiser is based on. In it, a bored hedonist named Frank Cotton solves a puzzle box in order to invoke the theologians of the Order of the Gash, who are a group of entities that are reported to bring you to a realm of pleasure that is unlike anything you have ever known. He's envisioning a bevy of naked ladies ready and willing to acquiesce to his every fantasy, but instead he gets a quartet of mutilated and pierced creatures that are androgynous. And even so, despite a bevy of context clues, including the fact that it's the Order of the Gash, it's not the collective of the fuzzy bunnies, he decides, yeah, sure, no, I'm into it, let's go. This story is nasty and brutish and short, but does not delve into the graphic torments that Frank faces. Instead of getting a play-by-play, blow-by-blow of all of the horrible things that he endures, you get a series of very specific, very evocative, very frightening details so that you can fill whatever you think happens in with your own personal worst nightmare. It's incredibly well written, and it's lyrical too. Here's a section that I just wanted to read to you because I was not expecting it. Instead of saying months passed between the time that Frank disappears and the time that his brother arrives in the house that was left to them in a will, it says, "The seasons long for each other, like men and women, in order that they may be cured of their excesses. Spring, if it lingers more than a week beyond its span, starts to hunger for summer to end the days of perpetual promise. Summer in its turn soon begins to sweat for something to quench its heat, and the mellowest of autumns will tire of gentility at last, and ache for a quick, sharp frost to kill its fruitfulness. Even winter, the hardest season, the most implacable, dreams as February creeps on of the flame that will presently melt it away. Everything tires with time and starts to seek some opposition to save it from itself. So August gave way to September, and there were few complaints." But be warned, this is the same book that features a demon lady who is sitting there with her thighs apart, exposing herself, and resting on those thighs are a series of severed tongues from her victims. And when she stands up, they fall to the ground like slugs. Plop, plop, plop. The 256-page Rosemary's Baby is a classic of psychological horror. You probably already know the story. Rosemary and her husband are living a charmed life in an apartment in New York City that they can't really afford. But even so, he convinces her that now would be the perfect time to have a baby. As her pregnancy progresses, she starts to feel more and more isolated and more paranoid, despite the fact that the really nice neighbors and her own doctor and her husband tell her that there's nothing to worry about, that everything's just fine. It's not a gory book, but the dread is all encompassing as Rosemary looks around for someone who will tell her the truth, or at least lend credence to the feelings that she's feeling. But is it really paranoia if what's happening is worse than you could possibly imagine? Don't know. And finally, Dark Matter is a 256-page ghost story that takes place on an expedition to the Arctic in the 1930s. Jack is an odd man out. He's educated but poor, and he is hired on this trip to go with a group of dilettantes, basically, who, have nothing to do when they're not hunting and going to their society parties. And so they're going to go do the big new fad, which is travel up to the Arctic to make a name for themselves. They bring along whiskey, tobacco, tons of food, blankets, fun clothes, and their mother is Dalton China, as well as a pack of actually very lovable huskies. Halfway through the journey, the captain of the ship pretends like he was never going to take them to Gruhoken, which is their intended destination. He's like, no, I never promised you I was going to go there. We were going to go to this other town. And he seems to be a man of integrity, so they don't understand why the sudden lying. And they press him on it, and he refuses to tell them why he doesn't want to go to that place. Although eventually he does end up dropping them off there. Jack starts to see and hear some things that are strange and are making him feel very uneasy, but none of his companions seem to be seeing the same things that he's seeing, or if they are, they're not talking about it, so he just kind of stuffs it down. He already feels isolated and feels like he may or may not have made the wrong decision in going on this trip, so he's just going to stick through it. He's going to suffer his little inconveniences and his discomfort and just see it out. One by one, through accidents and illnesses, the explorers start bailing out of the trip until it's just him and two other people. One is just this awful sort of kind of guy who's just a snot bucket and who's an idiot, and a man named Gus, who Jack feels like he could be friends with in another lifetime. However, disaster strikes when Gus gets appendicitis, and he and Algie, who is the jerk face, they have to go back to the mainland to get him some help. That leaves Jack by himself with just the dogs, trying to hold down the fort and keep the expedition going in everyone else's absence. He's alone in the Arctic Circle at the time of year when the sunlight is diminishing and diminishing and diminishing until it becomes permanent night for months on end. If you're looking for a little-known ghost story that is going to disturb you and haunt you for months on end after you read it, this is it. It's gorgeous, atmospheric, and beautifully written. So that's it. Short books that you can squeeze in between now and Halloween. My next video is going to be a preview for the Literary Festival at Sea. See you soon. Bye!